Today's story is so fierce, it will leave you breathless. Set against a western sky burned copper red by fire and fate. It unfolds where dust and blood share the same wind, and where the line between enemy and salvation is thinner than a blade. It begins with a burning ranch, a single spark in the night, small enough to seem like vengeance, powerful enough to change the destiny of two nations. The night above the Whitlock Ranch burned copper red, the barn folding in on itself with a groan that carried for miles. Sparks rode the wind like dying stars, and the adobe walls of the main house threw long, twisted shadows across the yard, where men already lay still. Varel Whitlock pressed her spine to the rough wall, the Winchester heavy in her arms, heavier still because her hands would not stop trembling. Smoke burned her eyes, her throat. She blinked through it, forcing the world to stay sharp. Hooves drummed closer. Through the haze, she saw them. Painted riders, faces hard in the firelight. Chirikawa. The word had lived in her nightmares since she was small, whispered by hands who worked her father's land. A figure staggered from the burning barn. Enoch, her brother. Shirt dark with blood, knees buckling. A warrior dismounted. A tomahawk rose. No. Riders wheeled, cartridges spilled from the rifle. The shot cracked wild, ricocheting off the stone fountain. Riders wheeled, cartridges spilled from her fingers into the dirt. Iron hands seized the Winchester, wrenching it away. She fought, nails, teeth, terror, and rage in equal measure. "Stop!" The voice cut clean through the noise, English edged with the low cadence of the mountains. The grip eased just enough. Varel looked up into a face carved from the dark. Sharp cheekbones, streaked black, eyes steady, searching. No triumph there, no hunger, only a quiet reading, as though he studied tracks in sand. "Let me go," she snarled, Spanish bleeding into English. "Kill me if you must. Be quick." The corner of his mouth lifted, faint. "You think I want your death?" "What else do men like you want?" She spat at his boots. "You've taken everything. My home, my family. Take the rest if it pleases you. It's only flesh." His hands closed around her wrists, firm, controlled. "You speak as if body and spirit are two different things," he said. "That is your people's way, not mine." A call rang out behind him in Chirikawa, urgent. He answered in clipped words. The others deferred. "Leader." He looked back at her. "I am Ulzana. I don't care what they call you." He studied her another beat. "You fought when others hid. You fired when grown men dropped their guns." His thumb brushed the inside of her wrist, finding the frantic pulse. "Your body shakes. Your spirit burns like the fire around us." Shouts erupted at the far end of the yard. Bluecoats drawn by the blaze. Cavalry. Hope surged in Varel's chest like a blade. Ulzana's face did not change. In one motion he pulled her against him and swung onto the paint horse. She landed astride in front of him, his arm a band of iron at her waist. "No, the soldiers will save me." "Save you?" His breath was warm against her ear as he turned the horse away from the approaching line. "They shoot first, ask questions of the dead. Do you think they will see Varel Whitlock through smoke and darkness? Or only a woman riding with Chirikawa?" Gunfire cracked behind them. Bullets hissed past, ripping the air. Ulzana forced her low against the horse's neck, his body shielding hers by instinct. Around them the band melted into the desert night, firing back as they went. Her last sight of home burned into memory. High walls her grandfather raised, the small chapel where Zerelda Whitlock had prayed each dawn, the corral where she learned to ride. All swallowed by flame, reduced to embers under a blackened sky. "Why me?" she whispered, tears finally coming. "Of all the women you could have taken." His answer drifted back, nearly lost in the rhythm of hooves. "Because you looked at me and saw a man, not a monster, even in fear, even in anger. You saw me as human. That is what the vision showed. Not a captive to break, a woman strong enough to choose." She closed her eyes, hollowed by loss, aware of the strange closeness, riding pressed to a warrior who spoke in riddles she did not believe. Visions. Fate. She had never credited such things. Yet as the burning ranch fell away, and the vast darkness of Chirikawa land opened before them, she wondered if belief mattered once the choice had already been made. The night wind carried sage and the promise of rain, stripping smoke from her hair. Somewhere far off a coyote cried, lonely, defiant, alive. She listened as if the dark itself might answer in a language she was only beginning to hear. Behind them, the glow of the ranch still stained the horizon, a beacon no one could miss. Cavalry would follow. Ulzana knew it. The law of the land was clear. Leave no trail that could lead bluecoats to water, to women, to children. Yet the fire had marked them all, and the woman in his arms was part of that mark now. He urged the paint faster. The band fanned out, scouts peeling away to cover their back trail. Varel felt the tremor in his arm. Not fear, but the weight of something heavier. A choice already made, and no path back. The darkness swallowed them, but the fire kept burning, and the soldiers kept coming. The desert had no mercy in it. 3 days of sun and dust had ground them down to bone and sinew. The bay mare under Varel Whitlock plodded forward, each step sending a dull ache through her bound wrists. The rawhide thongs had bitten deep. Blood had dried in thin, dark lines along her forearms. Thirst clawed at her throat like a living thing. She had not spoken since the first morning. Pride kept her silent. Pride, and the memory of the ranch still burning behind her eyes. Ulzana rode at her right flank, the paint horse stepping sure and quiet. He had said little since they left the firelight of the ranch, only short commands in Chirikawa to fun ahead, or Chapo behind. The band moved like shadows on the land, loose, watchful, reading every broken twig, every scuff in the alkali dust. They knew this country the way a man knows the lines of his own hand. They chose shade where none seemed to exist, skirted the open places where a distant rider might spot them. Every motion was measured. Waste nothing. Leave nothing. By the third afternoon, the heat pressed like a hand against her chest. Her lips cracked open when she tried to swallow. The world narrowed to the rhythm of hooves and the burn in her mouth. She held out as long as she could. "Water," she rasped at last. The word tasted like sand. Ulzana lifted his eyes to the west. A thin line of cottonwood stood pale against the haze. Water, hidden until you knew where to look. He turned the paint without a word. The others followed. At the stream he swung down, knife already in hand. Varel stiffened. The blade flashed once. The rawhide parted. He stepped back 2 paces, giving her room. She slid from the saddle, legs buckling. Knees hit the gravel bank. She cupped water in shaking hands, drank until her stomach cramped, then splashed her face and neck. The cold shocked her skin. When she looked up, Ulzana stood holding a strip of jerked meat from his pouch. "You could run," he said. quiet. No threat in it. She wiped her chin with the heel of her hand. To where? I'd die before the next moon. You know it. I know you have choices. He offered the meat again. Even now. She took it, tore a piece with her teeth. Salt stung the cuts in her mouth, but her body took it anyway. Some choice. Die with your people's killers or die alone in this God-forsaken place. Your brother lives. She froze, meat halfway to her lips. The one at the barn, Ulzana said. Wounded, not dead. We do not kill those who cannot fight. His gaze stayed on the water, on the small ripples made by wind. The old woman who cried out. Fear took her, not our hands. Kalita's face came unbidden, round, kind, smelling of wood smoke and bread. Varel closed her eyes against it. How do you know? Chapo watched from the ridge while you slept. Your brother reached the fort with the others. Hope flickered, thin and bitter. Then why burn it all? Why drag me out here? Your father's place sat on ground that was never his to claim. It was a message, to the bluecoats, to the ones coming behind. He paused. You were not meant to be part of it. Ascado Dilgis rode up then, face tight. He spoke low and fast in Chiricahua. Gestures cut toward Varel. Ulzana answered without raising his voice. The exchange went back and forth, short, edged. Ascado Dilgis turned away at last, jaw set. What did he say? Varel asked. He says bringing you was a mistake. Ulzana's tone stayed level. You slow us. You draw eyes. He thinks I have lost my head over pale skin. Heat climbed her neck. Have you? If I wanted only a pretty face, I would have looked elsewhere. Plain words, no softness. You are not soft. Your hands carry the mark of rope and rain. You are not what they think white women are. Then what am I to you? He watched light break on the stream for a long moment. A question, he said finally. One I have no answer for yet. They mounted again. The afternoon dragged on in heat and dust. Varel watched, despite herself, how the riders chose their path, how they read the land, how they shared water without a word when one skin ran low. Chapo passed his pouch to Fun without looking at him. Small things. Necessary things. When they halted at dusk, Ulzana pointed to a spot near the small fire they allowed themselves. Low. Smokeless. Sleep there. Run, and the desert will kill you before any blade does. She lay on the hard pan, skirt folded under her head. The band moved around her like people who had done this 1,000 times, tending horses, boiling thin stew of rabbit and sage, mending gear with quick fingers. Lazia came once, sat a bowl beside her, gray braids, scarred arms, eyes that missed nothing. She said nothing, walked away. Varel ate in silence. The taste was plain, good. She should hate the food. Hate them. Instead, she felt the strangeness settle deeper. Ulzana sat across the low flames. Lazia does not speak to outsiders. That she fed you matters. Varel looked into the fire. I should be planning how to put a knife in your back while you sleep. You could try. She met his eyes. I should hate you. Hate is easy, he said. The hard thing is seeing. Above them, the stars came out, cold and close. She lay awake long after the others slept, listening to horses breathe, to the low shift of wind through rock. Sleep came at last, thin and dreamless. She woke to Ulzana, already up, watching the eastern sky lighten. Chapo appeared at the canyon rim, face grim. He spoke low. Fresh sign. Cavalry tracks, close, following the watercourse they had used yesterday. Ulzana's hand tightened once on his rein. No words. The band rose without sound. Horses saddled in the gray light. Varel felt the shift like a blade at her neck. She was no longer just baggage. She was the trail they could not hide. They moved out fast, shadows among rocks, but the tracks were fresh, and the bluecoats were reading them. The law of the land was simple. Leave no path the enemy can follow to water, to women, to children. Yet here she was, still breathing, still riding. And the soldiers were closer than yesterday. The main camp hugged a shallow creek bed where the New Mexico line blurred into Arizona. Lodges pitched in careful circles against low canyon walls that caught the last of the afternoon sun and turned the hides the dull gold of old parchment. Dogs barked once, sharp, then quieted at the returning riders. Children ran out barefoot, dust rising around their legs, voices high and quick with questions. Women stopped mid-motion, hands on scrapers, pestles paused over corn, to watch. Some faces held curiosity. Others tightened when they saw the white woman riding among the band. Varel slid from the bay mare. Her legs felt strange on solid ground after days swaying in the saddle. The torn dress clung damp with sweat, hair matted to her neck. Ulzana dismounted beside the largest lodge, its covering painted with running horses in faded ochre. An older woman stepped through the flap, tall, silver in her braids, eyes that weighed everything at once. Lazia. She spoke to Ulzana in low Chiricahua, words quick and edged. He answered quietly. My mother, he said to Varel. She asks why I bring trouble inside our lodge. Varel dipped her head, the gesture awkward, small. Lazia's face stayed stone. She gestured once, sharp, toward the interior. Varel followed. Inside, the air hung thick with smoke, tanned leather, sage, and something sharper she could not name. Buffalo robes layered the floor. Painted parfleches lined the walls. Lances and bows hung from the poles. Lazia pushed a bundle into Varel's arms. Soft hide dress, leggings, moccasins, then pointed to a water basket and made the motion of washing. Varel stepped behind a painted screen, peeled off the ruined cloth that still carried the ghost smell of ranch smoke. The new clothing settled light against her skin, strange but useful. When she came out, Lazia studied her a long moment, then reached out with quick fingers to adjust the fit. Brisk, no warmth, only necessity. A younger woman entered, 20 summers maybe, eyes bright, smile easy. She carried a bone comb and sat behind Varel on the robes, working the tangles without asking. I am Yahnodja, she said in careful English, Ulzana's cousin. You are the woman from the vision. Varel winced as the comb caught. I don't know visions. I'm just the woman who shot at 5 warriors and didn't die. Yahnodja's laugh was soft. The camp talks of nothing else. Some say Ulzana has lost his mind. Others say his visions never fail. Days folded into work. Varel was neither prisoner nor guest, somewhere in between. Ulzana was gone much of the time, hunting, speaking with other leaders. Yahnodja pulled her to the women's tasks, scraping hides stretched tight on frames, gathering roots, mending. Sitting still helps no one, Yahnodja said once, handing her a scraper. The labor cut deeper than ranch chores. Blisters rose on palms already calloused. Her back ached from bending hours over frames. Mistakes drew laughter. Not cruel, but sharp enough to sting pride. Eskaminzim watched closest. Older, face mapped with scars, voice low and bitter whenever Varel passed. One morning she kicked over Varel's water basket. Liquid soaked the half-prepared hides in dark, spreading stains. Varel stared at the mess. Janoja touched her arm lightly. "Her son died in a raid last winter," she said. "She sees white skin and remembers. But you work. That confuses her." Varel learned the camp's pulse. Dawn fires coaxed back to life. Thin meals cooked, days of meat cut and dried. Roots dug, clothing patched. Children played with marked bones, shrieking when they won. Hunters returned with antelope or rabbit. The camp stirred in quiet thanks. Beauty came unexpected. Women beating patterns that caught the firelight. Girls laughing over games. The low murmur of elders' voices carrying weight. One afternoon, Chapo came limping in, shoulder wrapped in cloth dark with blood. Arrow wound, fresh from scouting. The medicine man was with another band. The injury waited for no one. Varel knelt beside him before thought caught up, old habit from tending ranch hands. "I can help," she told Lazia, who held the arrow shaft steady. "I've done this." Lazia's eyes narrowed. Risk, pride, memory of her son. Ulzana stood at the lodge edge. He gave one nod. "Let her." Varel breathed slow. The arrow had gone clean through. She asked for knife, herbs. Janoja fetched without pause. Hand steady, she snapped the head, drew the shaft, packed the wound with plants she knew from women's baskets. Chapo clenched his jaw, made no sound. When the bandage was tied, he looked at her, murmured something low. Ulzana translated. "He says thank you, and that you have gentle hands for someone fierce." That night, Lazia served Varel first at the meal. Small bowl set down without ceremony. The act carried weight. Next morning, even Eskaminzim gave a slight nod as they passed, eyes still lowered. "You're finding a place," Janoja said while they dug turnips. "Not as captive, as person. Few do." Varel pried at a root. "I'm still not free to leave." "Are you not?" Janoja glanced up. "You know the horses. You know the routes. Ulzana sets no guard on you now. What holds you?" The question stayed with Varel through the afternoon's work. Desert fear, yes, but she knew enough paths now to try. A main trail would bring bluecoats eventually. Evening found Ulzana at the horse herd, checking a hoof with quiet hands. Varel approached. "Janoja says I could go if I wanted. Is that true?" He set the hoof down. "Where?" "Fort Stockton. San Antonio. Anywhere." She paused. "I'd find Enoch. Try to rebuild." "Rebuild what?" He stepped closer. "Your father's ground on land never his. A life where men decide who you marry, what you do." The words sounded thin even to her. "It's what I know." "Is it?" His eyes held hers. "You mend our wounds. You learn our ways. Children come to you now without fear. That is not nothing." She looked away. "It doesn't mean I belong." "No, but it means the choice is not captivity against freedom. It is the woman you were raised to be against the woman you might become." Chapo came then, face tight. He spoke low to Ulzana. "Cavalry, 2 companies, closing fast, following the scout trail. They would hit at first light unless something slowed them." Ulzana's hand touched her shoulder. Brief. Gone. "Time you have," he said. "But the seasons do not wait. The army grows. Your choice cannot wait forever." Night settled. Varel lay on robes, listening. Baby quieted, watch calls soft, owl in the cottonwoods. She thought of Enoch, alive somewhere, of the narrow path waiting, obedience, arrangement, no questions. Then of Yahnoja's easy laugh, Chapo's nod, Ulzana's steady gaze, seeing what she had not yet seen in herself. Before dawn, Chapo returned. Fresh sign on the ridge, blue coat fires close enough to smell the smoke if the wind shifted. The children stirred already, small shadows in the gray light. Ulzana stood at the lodge flap, watching the east pale, face carved from stone. The air between them held the weight of what neither had yet spoken. The soldiers were coming, and the youngest would pay first. The band moved before first light. Lodges struck in silence, poles lashed tight, hides rolled and loaded on travois. No words passed beyond what was needed. The canyon mouth behind them still held the faint smell of yesterday's smoke. The creek they had left ran thin now, guarded by bluecoat pickets closing from the east. Ulzana led the way into a deeper valley cut between New Mexico ridges, walls rising steep and red, narrowing the sky to a thin blue ribbon overhead. The air cooled as they descended, carrying the scent of piñon and damp stone. They made camp in the late afternoon, where the creek forked and pooled under an overhang. The ground was hard-packed, good for lodges, hidden from open sight. Varel helped Yahnoja stretch fresh hides on frames, while Eskaminzim worked nearby, scraper moving in short, angry strokes. The older woman had said nothing since the water basket incident, but her silence carried weight. Varel kept her head down, hands busy with the heavy skin, scraping fat and membrane away in long, careful pulls. The blade bit into the hide with a soft rasp. Sweat ran into her eyes and stung. Ulzana had gone with Dasodaha to the high rim, speaking low about the cavalry sign Chapo had brought in at dawn. Tracks too fresh, too close to the spring they had used 2 days back. The old man's voice carried on the wind sometimes, measured, heavy with memory of other times the bluecoats had pressed this close. Varel reached for a small pouch at the edge of the frame to hold down a corner of hide. Her fingers brushed something soft, leather worn smooth by years of handling. A medicine bundle. Small, tied with sinew dyed red, the kind elders carried close to the body. She froze. The pouch slipped from her grasp, fell open on the dirt. A feather, a stone polished by river water, a twist of dried root tumbled out. Eskaminzim saw it first. Her scraper stopped. She rose slowly, face darkening. Yahnoja looked up, eyes widening. The air between the 3 women thickened. Even the wind seemed to pause. Eskaminzim spoke first, low and hard in Chiricahua. Yahnoja translated without looking at Varel. She says you have touched what no outsider may touch. The bundle belonged to her husband's father. It carries his breath, his protection. You have defiled it. Varel stared at the scattered contents. Her hand hovered, wanting to gather them, knowing she should not. She drew back. I didn't mean... The words died. No excuse would serve here. Eskaminzim stepped forward, kicked dirt over the spilled items with the toe of her moccasin. The act was deliberate, final. Yahnoja's hands stilled on the hide. Her shoulders tightened. Ulzana returned then, Dasodaha at his side. The old man saw the scene at once. Pouch open, contents dirtied, Eskaminzim standing rigid. He spoke quietly to Ulzana, words Varel could not follow, but felt the weight of. Ulzana listened, face unchanging. Ascadodilges appeared from the horse line, drawn by the tension, arms folded. Escaminzim pointed at Varel, voice rising only enough to carry. Ulzana answered once, short. Ascadodilges cut in, gesturing sharply. The argument stayed low, controlled, but the air grew heavier with every word. Dasodaha finally raised a hand. Silence fell. Ulzana turned to Varel. His eyes met hers. Steady, but something flickered behind them. A shadow of doubt he would not name. "You touched what should not be touched," he said. "The law is clear. Outsider hands on sacred things demand blood or exile." Varel's stomach turned. She looked at the dirtied pouch, then at Janosha, whose face had gone careful, distant. "I didn't know," she said. "I'll make it right." She knelt, gathered the items with careful fingers, feather, stone, root, placed them back in the pouch, tied the sinew as she had seen others do. Then she stood, took the scraper from Janosha's unresisting hand, and returned to the hide frame. She worked twice as fast, scraping until her arms burned, until the hide lay clean and smooth. No one spoke. Escaminzim watched, arms crossed. Janosha resumed beside her, but the easy rhythm between them had cracked. Ulzana stepped away with Dasodaha. Ascadodilges lingered, eyes on Varel, then followed. The old man's voice drifted back once, low, warning. That evening, Lazia came to the fire. She set a bowl before Varel, as always, but her hand paused a moment longer than usual. No words. She walked away. Varel ate in silence. The stew tasted of nothing. Later, Ulzana found her at the creek edge, washing blood from her hands. He stood a pace away, arms folded. "Ascadodilges says this proves you bring ruin," he said. "Dasodaha reminds me of the law. Vision or no vision, the bundle is sacred. Touching it breaks protection." Varel dried her hands on her leggings. "Then punish me. If I do, the band loses what the vision promised." He looked across the dark water. "If I do not, the law weakens. Either way, something is lost." And she met his gaze. "I'll leave at dawn. No one will follow." He said nothing for a long beat. Then, "You choose to stay and work double. That is your apology. It buys time, not forgiveness." She nodded once. Fun appeared then, breathing hard from the rim. He spoke to Ulzana in quick Chirikawa. Ulzana listened, face tightening. Fun gestured toward the east ridge. "Cavalry," Ulzana said when Fun left. "They have found the spring we left. They camp there tonight. The water that feeds our valley runs through it. If they hold it, we lose the source." Varel felt the words settle cold in her chest. The children had played near that water yesterday. Lazia had carried buckets from it at dawn. Ulzana looked at her. "They call you the cause. Escaminzim, Ascadodilges, even some who were quiet before." The night wind moved through the cottonwoods, carrying the faint smell of piñón smoke from distant fires. Cavalry fires. Varel stood still, hands wet, listening to the silence stretch between them. Ulzana turned back toward the lodges without another word. The decision hung unfinished, heavy as the dark coming down the canyon walls. The spring was lost unless something changed by morning, and every eye in camp knew who carried the blame. The valley near the Sonora line lay lower than the last, the creek reduced to a thin silver thread winding between cracked banks. The band had reached it after 2 hard days of travel, lodges raised again in haste under the overhang of red rock walls that cut the wind but offered little shade from the relentless sun. The air smelled of dry earth and distant mesquite. The water tasted of alkali and ran slower each day as the horses drank, and the women carried what little remained to the fires. Varel worked with the women at the edge of the camp, Janoja beside her, Eskaminzim a few paces away. They knelt in the sparse grass, digging prairie turnips with sharpened sticks, the roots small and tough this season. Dust coated their hands, their faces. Sweat traced clean lines through the grime. Children played nearby at first, small shadows chasing a rolled stone, but by midday they moved slower. Voices thin, tongues swollen. One little girl, no more than 5, sat against a rock and cried without sound until her mother carried her away to the last full water skin. Varel kept her eyes on the ground, prying at a stubborn root. The silence around her felt heavier than the heat. Janoja worked without pause, but her movements had lost their usual quickness. Eskaminzim scraped earth with short, angry jabs, glancing once at Varel, then away. Ulzana had been gone since dawn, riding the high ridges with Chapo and Fun, scouting what remained of the old hunting grounds. When he returned in the late afternoon, his face was set, dust streaking his cheeks like war paint that had not been applied. He spoke briefly to Dasodaha outside the lodge, words too low to carry, then walked the horse line checking hooves and packs. He did not look toward Varel, but she felt the weight of his gaze pass over her once, then away. Chapo approached her while the women rested in the thin shade. His shoulder still carried the bandage she had tied. He moved stiff, but steady. He stopped a pace away, arms folded. "If the band starves," he said quietly, "you will be the first they give to the desert, not because they hate you, because the law says the stranger brings the curse, and hunger makes the law louder." Varel's stick paused in the dirt. She looked up at him. His eyes held no anger, only the flat certainty of a man who had seen hunger before. "I know," she said. He nodded once and walked away. That evening the women gathered what roots they had found, enough for a thin soup, no more. Varel helped Janoja carry the baskets back to the fires. The children sat close to the low flames, small hands outstretched, waiting for whatever came. One boy coughed dry and ragged. His mother pressed a damp cloth to his forehead, but the cloth was already drying. Ulzana found her later at the creek's edge, where she knelt rinsing the last of the day's dirt from her hands. He stood upstream, filling a small skin from the trickle that remained. "The big hunting grounds are cut off," he said without preamble. "Bluecoats have patrols along the old trails. We cannot go there without fighting, and fighting now means we lose more than we can spare." She dried her hands on her leggings. "So you hunt closer? Closer to the settler lines?" He tied the skin shut. "The law says we do not take game near their fences. It brings trouble. But the children are thinning. The women are thinning. We hunt tomorrow. Small game, near the edge. No choice." Varel looked at the dark water pooling around stones. "And me? You stay in camp. Safer." She shook her head. "If I stay hidden, they blame me more. Let me go with the women. Small hunt, rabbits, birds. I can help." He studied her a long moment. The creek murmured between them. "If a scout sees you, the bluecoats will know we have you. They will come harder. And if I stay idle while the children go hungry, what then?" She met his eyes. "I'm already the curse in some mouths. Let me be useful instead." He said nothing. Then he handed her the filled skin. "Dawn, with Janoja and the others. Stay low. No noise." She took it. The leather was cool against her palm. That night the camp settled early. Fires burned low to hide the glow. Varel lay on her robes listening to the children breathe. Shallow, quick. Somewhere a woman hummed a soft song to quiet a restless one. Ulzana sat outside the lodge with Dasodaha, their voices a murmur lost in the wind. She could not hear the words, but the tone carried the same heaviness she had felt since the medicine bundle. Before light, Baishan returned from the ridge, horse lathered, breathing hard. He spoke to Ulzana at the horse line. Varel heard the urgency even from her robes. Ulzana listened, then walked the camp perimeter once, checking the watches. When he passed her lodge, he paused, shadow falling across the opening. Baishan says the Bluecoats have built a picket camp at the border crossing, he said low. They hold the last good trail into Mexico. No way south without passing through them. Varel sat up slowly. The air inside the lodge felt close, thick with the smell of smoke and unwashed hides. They know we are close, Ulzana continued. If we fight, we lose half the band. If we run, we lose the rest to thirst and hunger. If we stay... He let the words hang. The silence stretched. Outside, a child whimpered once, then quieted. Ulzana turned away without finishing the thought. Dawn would bring the hunt, small, desperate, near the settler edge. And beyond that, the picket camp waited, cutting the last open path. The band faced the choice now, plain and brutal. Fight and bleed, run and wither, or bend in a way the old law had never allowed. Ulzana's footsteps faded into the dark. The decision remained unspoken between them, heavy as the dry wind moving down the valley, carrying the faint, distant smell of wood smoke from Bluecoat fires. The sacred cave opened high in the canyon wall, a narrow mouth screened by scrub oak and rockfall, reachable only by a steep goat trail the band knew by feel. Inside, the air stayed cool and still, heavy with the smell of old smoke and dried herbs. A low fire burned in the center pit, fed just enough to light the faces of the gathered men. Dasodaha seated on a folded robe at the back, silver hair catching the flicker. Lazaya standing near the entrance, arms crossed. Ulzana kneeling beside the fire, face carved from shadow. Ascadodilges and Chapo sat to one side, silent. The elders who remained spoke in low turns, words measured as stones dropped in deep water. Varel waited outside on the ledge, back to the rock, knees drawn up. The wind moved past her, carrying dust, and the faint scent of piñon from below. She had not been invited in, but Yahnoja had whispered the place to her after the evening meal, eyes serious. They speak of you tonight. Listen if you dare. Inside, Dasodaha's voice rose once, calm but carrying. The Bluecoats camp one day's ride. Their new guns speak farther than ours. Tonkawa scouts ride with them. They follow our trail like wolves on blood. The spring is held. The children grow thin. The law says the stranger who brings death must answer with blood or leave the band forever. Silence followed. The fire popped once. Ulzana shifted, the motion small but deliberate. The vision came 3 winters past, he said. At the sacred springs. 4 days without food or water. On the 4th night the spirits showed a woman standing between 2 rivers, one red with blood, the other clear with hope. Where she stood, the waters began to join. I saw her face the night the ranch burned. She fought us. She looked at me and saw a man, not a monster. That is why I brought her. Ascadodilges leaned forward. Vision or no vision, she draws the Bluecoats. She touched the sacred bundle. She is the curse. The law is clear. Lazia spoke then, voice low. The law protects the band. If she stays and they come, the children die first. If she goes, perhaps they follow her trail instead. Ulzana's hands rested on his knees, palms up. If we kill her, we kill what the vision promised. If we exile her, we lose the bridge it showed. Either way, the band weakens. The cave held the words. No one moved. Varel felt the rock cold against her back. Her heart beat steady but loud in her ears. She rose without sound, stepped to the entrance. The firelight reached her feet. They turned as one. Dasodaha's eyes narrowed. Lazia's arms tightened. Ulzana met her gaze, face unreadable. I heard, Varel said. Her voice came out steady, though her hands trembled at her sides. I will go to them. I will lie. Tell them the band rides north toward the canyons. Draw them away. Let the children live. Silence thicker than before. Ascatodilgis spoke first. You would betray your own kind? They are not my kind if they kill children. She stepped fully into the light. I will dress as a Mexican trader's wife. Ulzana can come as the husband. 4 warriors as guards. We meet them on the trade road. I speak the words. If they believe, they turn. If they do not, she let the thought finish itself. Dasodaha looked to Ulzana. You would risk this? Ulzana rose slowly. The vision showed a choice. Not a captive broken. A woman who stands between. If she speaks truth now, we let her try. Lazia's eyes moved from Varel to her son. She said nothing, but her shoulders eased a fraction, the smallest concession. Ascatodilgis stood. If it fails, her blood is on your hands. Ulzana nodded once. Then it is mine. Varel felt the weight settle in her chest, final, unyielding. The old life, the ranch, Enoch waiting somewhere in a fort bed, all of it slipped further away with every breath. She had crossed a line no words could erase. Ulzana turned to the others. We leave before light. 4 riders. Fun Chapo, 2 more. Dress plain. No paint. No weapons in sight. The council broke without ceremony. Men rose, filed out past Varel. Dasodaha paused at the entrance, looked at her a long moment, then walked on. Lazia followed last, brushing close enough that Varel smelled the sage on her clothing. No words. Only a single glance. Warning, perhaps, or something closer to farewell. Outside, the night had deepened. Stars pressed close. Varel stood on the ledge, wind pulling at her hair. Ulzana came last. You understand what this means, he said quietly. I do. If they see through the lie, they kill us both. If they believe, they hunt the wrong trail, but they will hunt harder after. She nodded. He looked east, where the horizon still held the faint glow of distant fires. We ride at false dawn. They descended the trail in silence. Below, the camp lay quiet, lodges dark except for the low glow of watchfires. Varel felt the eyes on her, some curious, some hard. Janoja waited at the bottom, handed her a bundle. Mexican dress, shawl, simple jewelry taken in old raids. No words between them, only a brief touch of hands. By the horse line, Ulzana waited with the paint and 4 others. Fun, Chapo, 2 quiet men she knew by sight. They mounted without haste. Varel swung up behind Ulzana, arms loose around his waist as the others had taught her. The band watched them go. silent shapes in the dark. They rode out of the canyon mouth as the first gray light touched the east. Behind them, the lodges faded into shadow. Ahead, the trade road waited, and somewhere along it, bluecoat patrols moved. On a far ridge, a single rider paused. Cavalry scout, field glass raised. He held still a long moment, then turned his horse back toward the main column. The horizon brightened. Dust rose behind them. The lie was set in motion, and there was no path back. The trade road cut straight across the flat near the Sonora border, a pale scar of dust and wagon ruts under a sky gone the color of old iron. They had ridden out before false dawn, 5 riders plus Varel, keeping to low ground until the sun cleared the ridge. Ulzana chose the spot deliberately, an open stretch flanked by low mesquite, visible from miles but not so close to any settlement that questions would come too fast. They stopped at midday, dismounted, and set camp plain for all to see. A small fire built of dry sticks to keep smoke thin, blankets spread. Horses hobbled in plain sight. 4 warriors, Fan Chapo and 2 others, squatted near the flames, faces unpainted, shirts plain cotton taken from old raids. Ulzana wore a worn serape over his buckskin. Varel had changed into the Mexican dress Yahnocha pressed into her hands the night before. Blue cotton faded at the seams, a shawl of dark wool, hair braided simple and tied with ribbon. They waited. The sun dropped slow, dragging shadows long across the road. Varel sat on a blanket with her back to a low rock, knees drawn up, hands folded in her lap to hide the tremor. The dress felt wrong against her skin. Too fine. Too foreign. But she kept it straight, smoothed the skirt once. Twice. Ulzana knelt beside the fire, feeding it small sticks, movements deliberate, eyes on the eastern horizon where dust sometimes rose and fell with passing riders. He had spoken little since they left the canyon. Now he said nothing at all. Fun rose once to check the horses. Chapo sharpened his knife on a whetstone, the soft scrape the only sound besides wind through the brush. The others sat still, watching the road in turns. No one laughed. No one spoke of home. As dusk thickened, the air turned cooler, carrying the faint metallic bite of coming night. Varel felt the lie settle heavier in her chest with every breath. She had rehearsed the words in her mind. Senor Reyes and his wife Elena, traders bound for the fort, caught between raids. But saying them aloud would make them real. And real meant no way back to the girl who had once prayed in the ranch chapel beside Varel Whitlock. Ulzana moved to her side, crouched low so his shadow fell across her hands. "When they come," he said quietly, "you speak. I follow. If it goes wrong, stay behind me." She looked at him. His face held no promise, only the flat certainty of a man who had weighed the cost. "I know what I have to say." He nodded once. Then he reached into his pouch, drew out a small silver ring, plain, worn smooth by years, and slipped it onto her finger. The metal felt cold against her skin. "For the part," he said. "Nothing more." She closed her hand around it. The weight was small but final. They built the fire brighter as full dark came. Ulzana sat beside her, close enough that she felt the warmth of him against the night chill. She called him Alejandro in practice once, voice low. He answered Elena without hesitation. The name tasted strange on her tongue, like dust and betrayal mixed together. Dawn broke gray and thin. Dust rose on the eastern road, steady, deliberate. Cavalry. 2 squads at least, blue coats catching the first light, Tonkawa scouts riding point. They approached cautious, carbines across saddles, eyes scanning the camp. The lieutenant reined up 20 paces out. Young, fair, academy stiff in his posture. Identify yourselves. Ulzana stood slow, hands open. Alejandro Reyes, trader. This is my wife, Elena. We head for Fort Stockton. Got caught between the trouble. Varel rose beside him, shawl pulled tight, eyes lowered at first, then lifted steady. Please, she said, voice pitched soft but clear. We've been running days. Saw the smoke from the Whitlock place. Hid till they passed. The screams! She let her hand rise to her throat, fingers trembling just enough. The lieutenant dismounted, boots crunching gravel. His gaze lingered on her pale skin, the blue dress too fine for the road. You witnessed the raid? From distance only. She swallowed. Painted riders. 30, maybe more. They went north after, toward the canyons. Ulzana played the nervous husband, gestures quick, accent thickened. We hired guards near Presidio, cost half our goods, better than meeting those devils. The sergeant, older, sun-scarred, studied the 4 warriors. They look rough enough. Tonkawa, Varel said quick. Old army scouts, hate Apache same as you. The sergeant's eyes narrowed on her. You speak fine English for a Mexican trader's wife. My father believed in schooling. She held his gaze. Said a woman should know tongues in a changing world. A long beat. The lieutenant glanced at his men, then back. Make for the fort. These roads aren't safe. They mounted up. The column turned north, following the false trail she had given. Varel watched them go, breath shallow, hands clenched in the shawl until her knuckles ached. The sergeant lingered last. He reined close, leaned down. Curious thing, he said soft. Your English is too clean, too quick. She smiled thin. Blame my father. He studied her another moment, then touched his hat brim and followed the others. Dust rose behind them, drifting slow on the wind. Ulzana exhaled once, long and quiet. Varel felt the ring heavy on her finger. Cold, unyielding. They believed, she whispered. For now. But the sergeant had looked back once, long enough for doubt to take root. And somewhere in the camp, Ascadodilges would hear of this. Ulzana shielding a white woman with his body, calling her wife before bluecoats, lowering himself to play a part no warrior should play. The trust he had held from some would fray, thread by thread. The fire burned low. Varel stared at the coals, the silver ring catching a last glint of light. Ulzana stood beside her, silent. The road stretched empty now, but the sergeant's backward glance hung between them like smoke that would not clear. The band's survival rested on her words, and on how long those words would hold before the truth came hunting. The Cañón del Rescate cut deep through red rock, walls rising sheer on both sides, narrowing the sky to a long, pale strip overhead. A white tent stood alone in the middle of the dry wash, canvas snapping faintly in the wind that carried the smell of dust and heated stone. Bluecoat soldiers lined the rims above, 2 full companies. Carbines rested on rocks, muzzles pointed down like waiting teeth. Tonkawa scouts crouched among them, faces painted, eyes sharp. General Thane Grimshaw watched from a ridge saddle, field glass catching the light once, then lowered. Below, Ulzana led the small delegation into the open. Desodaha at his right, 2 older men behind, no weapons visible. They moved slow, deliberate, boots and moccasins raising small puffs of dust that hung in the still air. Varel walked between Ulzana and Dasodaha, the Mexican dress replaced by a simple calico skirt and blouse Janoja had sewn, plain enough to pass between worlds, marked enough to remind both sides who she was. Her hands stayed loose at her sides, but her pulse beat hard against the collarbone. Lieutenant Dax Harrow waited beside the tent flap, posture straight, but eyes careful. Colonel Enoch Vale stood inside, arms folded, gray mustache stiff against a face carved by years of frontier command. He did not offer a hand. No one sat at first. Vale spoke first. "You come to talk surrender?" Dasodaha answered through Varel. She translated steady, voice low but carrying. "We come to find a path where children live." Vale's eyes flicked to Ulzana. "Your kind has raided, burned, killed. The terms are simple. Disarm, move to the reservation at Fort Sill. No more." Ulzana's face stayed still. Varel carried his words. "Disarm, and we die slow. Our horses, our language, our ceremonies, we keep them. We are allies, not prisoners." Vale snorted once. "Allies don't steal cattle. Allies don't leave settlers bleeding on their own ground." Varel translated, then added her own weight without pause. "Imagine your herds gone, your fields empty, your children hungry. That is what they face. Give them a way to feed families without raids, and the raids end." The tent held the silence. Wind moved the canvas. A carbon shifted on the rim above with a faint metallic click. Harrow stepped forward once, spoke low to Vale. The colonel listened, jaw tight, then waved him silent. Ulzana spoke again. Varel carried it. "We have hunted failing. Land shrinks. We take what we must. Offer honorable work. Scout for rustlers, track hostiles, and the taking stops." Vale leaned in. "You ask me to arm savages and trust them with army secrets." Varel met his eyes. "You fought them years. Has it worked? Or only made more orphans on both sides?" The words hung. Vale's face darkened. Dasodaha watched without blinking. Ulzana stood motionless, eyes fixed on Varel, the only steady point in the tent. Harrow spoke then. "A trial. 6 moons. They camp near the fort, not penned, but close. They scout for us. We supply them. See if it holds." Vale stared at him, then at Varel. "You stake your life on this?" "I stake everything," she said. Silence again. Outside, a horse shifted. Leather creaked. Vale looked up at the rims, sights trained, fingers near triggers, then back. 6 moons, he said at last. 1 sign of treachery, and my men open fire. Clean war. No questions. Ulzana nodded once. Dasodaha murmured agreement. Varel translated the final terms. Horses kept, ceremonies allowed, no chains. Vale signed the paper with short, angry strokes. Ulzana made his mark beside it. Simple cross, deliberate. The tent flap opened. They stepped into the wash. Soldiers watched from above, barrels still lowered but ready. Varel felt the eyes on her back, some from the blue line, some from the small knot of Chirikawa waiting at the canyon mouth. She had spoken for both. Neither would forget. Ulzana walked beside her toward the waiting horses. He said nothing. His hand brushed hers once. Brief. Gone. The gesture carried no promise, only the weight of what had been done. At the far end of the wash, a small figure stood half hidden behind rock. child of Yanocha, no more than 8, dark eyes wide and unblinking. He had watched the entire council from distance, small hands clenched at his sides. He saw the paper signed, saw the marks made, saw Varel stand between 2 fires that had not yet consumed her. He said nothing, only watched. The memory went into him like water into dry earth. Quiet. Permanent. Vale's voice carried from the tent as they mounted. "If it fails, Miss Whitlock, I'll have my war. Clean conscience." Varel did not look back. The child stepped out fully now, small shadow against the red wall, eyes still on her. Ulzana urged his paint forward. The band turned away down the canyon. Dust rose behind them. The rifles above stayed trained until the last rider vanished around the bend. The agreement lay signed on the table in the white tent. Thin as paper. Fragile as the child's gaze that had seen it all and would carry it forward, wordless, into whatever came next. The trial camp lay a measured mile from Fort Stockton's walls, close enough for the bluecoats to watch, far enough for the lodges to stand in their own circle without touching the picket line. 6 moons had passed since the paper was signed in the canyon. The hides still smelled of sage and smoke. The fires burned low and smokeless at night. But the rhythm had changed. Army wagons rolled in once a week with flour, beans, coffee, supplies that kept the children from thinning further, but carried the taste of obligation. Varel moved between the 2 worlds like a woman walking a narrow log over swift water. Mornings she sat with the Chirikawa children under the cottonwoods, drawing letters in the dust with a stick. Simple words in English, then the shapes of animal tracks in the sand. The small ones watched her hands, repeated the sounds, laughed when they stumbled. She taught them to read sign the way Ulzana had once shown her. The broken twig that meant a horse had passed, the scuff that told direction. They listened, eyes bright, but their mothers watched from the lodge flaps with careful faces. Afternoons, she crossed the open ground to the fort, translating scout reports for Lieutenant Dax Harrow. Ulzana rode out with him most days, buckskin traded for a plain army tunic, the temporary uniform that chafed more than any rawhide thong. He led small parties tracking rustlers or stray hostiles, returning dust-streaked and silent. Varel met his eyes when he dismounted. He held her gaze a moment longer each time, then looked away. The strain showed in small ways. Her hands trembled now when she held a pen to copy maps. Her cheeks had hollowed, skin drawn tighter over bone. Sleep came fitful, broken by dreams of the ranch chapel and the sacred cave, the 2 places pulling at her until she woke, tasting dust. One morning a warrior, young, hungry-eyed, killed a settler's cow grazing too close to the camp boundary. The animal had wandered. The man had not seen the line. The shot was quick, clean, but the settler found the carcass and rode to the fort, screaming theft. Vale's men arrived within the hour, carbines ready. Varel stood between the lodge circle and the soldiers, voice steady as she translated the explanations. The warrior was confined to camp for a week. The beef was paid for from army stores. The incident passed, but the air stayed thicker afterward. Children no longer ran freely to the edge of the camp. Mothers kept them closer. Another day, a drunk trooper wandered into the lodges laughing, reaching for a girl's braid. Ulzana stepped in front of her without a word. The trooper sobered fast under his stare, backed away, muttering. No blood was drawn, but the law about protecting the young had been tested again, and the women remembered. Varel grew thinner. Translation sessions left her throat raw. Ulzana watched her from across the fire at night, saying nothing. Once he handed her a small pouch of dried meat without looking at her. She took it. Their fingers brushed. He did not pull away at once. Lazia came to her one evening while she sat mending a shirt by firelight. The older woman set a bowl of stew beside her. Rabbit, sage, no words. Then she looked at Ulzana across the flames, where he cleaned his rifle with slow, careful strokes. The tunic lay folded beside him. He wore it only when he rode with Harrow. Lazia's eyes held sorrow, not anger. She touched Varel's arm once, light, brief, then walked back to her lodge. Ulzana rose later, walked the perimeter alone. Varel followed at a distance. He stopped at the horse line, hand on a paint's neck. "You could go back," he said without turning. "Enoch waits at San Antonio. The fort would take you." She stood beside him. The horse blew softly against his palm. "I could." He looked at her then. "But you stay." "I stay." The words hung between them. He did not ask why. She did not explain. The choice had been made moons ago, in the canyon, under rifles. To leave now would break something neither could name. The next morning, General Thane Grimshaw arrived with his staff, horses kicking dust along the road from the fort. He rode through the camp without dismounting at first, eyes scanning lodges, children, the scout parties returning. Ulzana met him at the edge of the circle, tunic buttoned, face still. Varel stood a pace behind, ready to translate if needed. Grimshaw reined up. "Report says the trial holds. No major incidents." Ulzana nodded once. "But one cow dead," Grimshaw continued. "One trooper too drunk to know better. Small things add up." Varel translated. Ulzana answered through her. "Small things happen when two peoples share ground. We learn." Grimshaw studied him. Then Varel. "You've lost weight, Miss Whitlock. This bridge you built, it costs." She met his eyes. "It costs both sides." He dismounted then, walked the camp with Harrow at his side. Children watched from behind lodge flaps. A small boy, son of Yanoja, stepped out once Grimshaw had passed. He approached Varel, hand closed around something. He opened it, a tiny medicine bundle, no bigger than a walnut, sinew tied with red thread. The same one she had touched moons ago, cleaned now, restored. Varel closed her fingers around it. Varel closed her fingers around it. The bundle felt warm from his hand. Across the camp, Ulzana watched, face unreadable. Grimshaw mounted again, nodded once to Harrow, then rode out with his escort. Dust settled slow behind them. Varel looked at the small pouch in her palm. The knot was tight, the contents hidden but whole. Yet something in its weight felt changed. Lighter, perhaps, or heavier with what had been lost to keep it safe. Ulzana walked to her side. He did not touch the bundle. He only looked at it, then at her. The wind moved through the cottonwoods. Somewhere a child laughed. Thin, brief. The agreement held, but the scars beneath it ran deep, and the boy's gift carried the memory of both. Neither spoke. The camp settled into evening quiet, fires low, and the question of how long the bridge would bear the weight remained unanswered between them. Dawn came slow over the trial camp, the first light spilling pale across the mile of open ground that separated Chirikawa lodges from the fort's straight walls. General Thane Grimshaw had ridden out the day before with his escort, paper signed again, 6 more moons of the uneasy truce. Supplies would continue, scouts would ride, no one would fire unless provoked. The words had been spoken plain. The general had looked at Varel once before mounting, eyes unreadable, then turned his horse east without farewell. Now the camp stirred in the gray hour. Fires were coaxed back to life with dry twigs, smoke kept thin. Varel walked alone to the narrow strip of earth at the boundary, neither fully in the lodges nor inside the picket line. She had claimed the ground moons ago, turned it with a borrowed spade until the soil loosened. Today she knelt there, knees pressing into damp dirt that still held the night's chill. In her palm lay the last of the seeds she had carried from the ranch. Small, hard rose hips from her grandmother's bushes, wrapped in cloth through fire and flight. She pressed them one by one into the row she had prepared, spacing them careful beside the sage she had transplanted from the canyon weeks before. The sage took root easy, gray-green leaves already spreading low. The roses would need time, months, perhaps years, to show thorn and bloom. She covered each seed with soil, tamped it gentle with her palm, felt the cool weight of earth close over what had once grown behind adobe walls. Wind moved through the acacia trees that marked the line, carrying the faint smell of piñon smoke from the lodges and the sharper scent of coal from the fort's stoves. She worked without hurry, breath steady but shallow, hands steady but thinner than they had been. The bundle the boy had given her yesterday rested against her breast under the blouse. Small, warm, a reminder she carried without speaking of it. Ulzana stood under the largest acacia, a dozen paces back, arms folded, face half in shadow. He had not come closer since she began planting. His eyes followed her hands, slow, deliberate, as she set the last rose hip and smoothed the soil. He made no move to join her. No word passed his lips. The distance between them held everything unsaid. The nights he had ridden out in the borrowed tunic, the mornings she returned from the fort with throat raw from translating, the way Lazaya's gaze had softened, then saddened when she saw the uniform folded beside his robes. A small figure appeared at the edge of the garden. The boy, Yanoja's son, the one who had watched from the canyon rim and carried the memory of the signed paper in his eyes. He stood a few feet away, bare feet planted in the dust, holding nothing now. His gaze moved from Varel to the new planted row, then to Ulzana under the tree. He said nothing, only watched. Varel rose slowly, brushed dirt from her palms. She looked at the ground, rose seeds hidden beside sage roots, and felt the old world close over the new one, irreversible. The roses would grow, or they would not. The sage would spread or wither. Either way, the ground had changed. She could no longer walk back to the chapel at the ranch without carrying this soil under her nails. She turned toward the lodges, then paused. Ulzana still stood under the acacia, unmoving. Their eyes met across the short distance. He gave no sign, no nod, no gesture. But the look held long enough to carry the weight of what neither would voice. She belonged to both places now, and to neither fully. He accepted it the way a man accepts a wound that will not heal clean. The boy stepped forward then. He reached into his pouch, drew out the small medicine bundle, restored, tied tight, and placed it on the edge of the new row beside the last sage plant. No word, no ceremony. He set it down careful, as though it belonged there, then turned and ran back toward the lodges, small feet kicking dust. Varel knelt again. She touched the bundle once, fingers brushing the red sinew, then let her hand fall to the earth. She whispered the dawn prayer Ulzana had taught her moons ago, words in Chirikawa she had practiced until they came without stumbling. She spoke only half, stopped midway, throat closing on the rest. The old oath felt broken in her mouth, the new one not yet whole. Ulzana watched from the tree. He did not come forward. After a long moment he turned, walked back toward the camp without looking again. His shoulders carried the same quiet authority they always had, but something in the set of them spoke of a loss already taken. The boy reached the lodges, disappeared inside. The bundle lay on the soil between rose and sage. Small, silent witness to what had been kept and what had been given away. Wind rose again, moving through the garden. The sage leaves trembled. The bare earth over the rose seeds stayed still. Beneath it all, the ground held the old crack from the ranch fire. Faint scar in the dirt, never quite filled. The camp woke fully behind her, fires crackling, voices low. Varel remained kneeling, hands in the soil, listening to the quiet that followed the half-prayer. No victory rang clear. No peace settled whole. Only survival. Scarred and continuing, with the memory carried forward in a child's eyes and a small bundle left between two roots that would grow together or not at all. The sun climbed higher. The day waited. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Your presence means more than you know. If today's story awakened something inside you, don't let the trail end here. There are many more tales of courage, devotion, and faith waiting to be discovered. Subscribe, comment, share, and come back as we continue this unforgettable journey. Thank you, truly. Aviso Legal. Bara Disclaimer. All stories are intended solely for entertainment and may include fictionalized scenarios or dramatization derived from historical contexts. While AI assists in production, human creators supervise and adjust every piece to maintain sincerity, credibility, uneasy, and emotional quality. We adhere entirely to platform regulations regarding AI content, ensuring no deepfakes or misleading portrayals. Licensed materials are used responsibly. Republishing, modifying, or extracting content without authorization is not allowed. We appreciate every viewer who respects originality and creative effort.